The speech time, the target time is what? 5 minutes. So 4 to 5 minutes. If you go over, you'd lose a few points. If you go too far under, you'd lose a few points. So hopefully you can be within that range. We'll use the timing system, which to recall would be when you start, you'd have 5, and then the timer in the room would say 4, and then 3, and then 2, and then 1. And what's the symbol for half a minute? Right? And then when you get to 10 seconds, 10, 9, 8, all the way down. And then, of course, time would be, you better be finished or wrap it up pretty quick.
Although I had seen hundreds of golf tournaments before on TV, never before had I seen a golf tournament in person. My dad and I were on our way to the 2008 AT&T National Pro-Am. Pro-Ams are tournaments where professional golfers are paired with amateurs and celebrities, such as the famous comic Bill Murray and the championship surfer Kelly Slater, are just a few of the favorites. I was so anxious to finally be at the most famous and expensive public golf course in the world, Pebble Beach. As though all of that was not enough, I was extremely excited to have the opportunity to meet the 2003 Masters champion, Mike Weir. I was very anxious to arrive at Pebble Beach, which I already said is the nicest and most prestigious course in the world, and it's located in Monterey Bay, California. It sits on the cliffs next to the Pacific Ocean, and with the lined course of the pine trees and cypress trees. And what made it all the more special was that I could share the experience with my dad. My parents have mutual friends with Mike Weir, who is the best Canadian golfer ever. He's left-handed, and he won the 2003 Masters. I arrived at the beach house where the Weir family was staying. Mrs. Weir greeted us and introduced us to his daughters. She drove us to the course to watch the tournament. And it was more beautiful than I ever could have imagined, even in the PlayStation game. The condition of the course was amazing. The fairways had the perfect mowing pattern. The undulating surface was of the putting greens, and the golden sand bunkers, and the perfectly manicured fairways and rough made it the perfect golfing conditions. It was a beautiful, warm, sunny day, which was rare for February weather. The scenic location for the golf tournament usually involves foggy weather, rainy, and winds up to 100 miles an hour, were the usual weather for that tournament, but this time it was different. We caught up to Mr. Weir's group on number 5 at Spyglass Hill. I remember being so impressed with the speedy yet controlled swing of Mr. Weir. I followed the group for the rest of the day. I became engrossed. Even when Kelly Slater passed the group behind, my dad went over to see, but I stayed. I didn't want to leave Mr. Weir. At the end of the play, we were invited to go back to the Weir's house. When we were having snacks, he walked through the front door. I was so nervous, but I introduced myself to him. We spent about a half hour talking about me and him. He gave me a lot of advice, but the most important he gave me was to have great patience, to work on my patience, and to work on my short game. Later that evening, before I left, he pulled out 3 of his hats from his travel bag and let me choose one. I still have it in my room today. He gave me a case of Pro V1X golf balls, which are $60 per dozen. He signed my Pebble Beach ball that I had bought the day before, and I just thought I was in a dream. I was so exhausted from all the excitement, I fell asleep on the way to the house we were staying at. I slept through dinner. The next day, we followed Mr. Weir the entire round. On the 16th hole, he made a birdie and threw the ball to me. It was clearly intended toward me, when suddenly an eager fan jumped out in front of me and just grabbed the ball. Without saying anything, Mike told him to give me back the ball. That eager fan wasn't so eager. He gave me the ball immediately. At the end of the second day, our mutual friend gave me an autographed flag from Pebble Beach, signed by Mike Weir. I was excited to go, but the experience was better than I ever could have imagined. Watching the professional golfers in person was so much better than watching it on TV. Mike's generosity, attentiveness, and patience, I decided to thank him by giving him his favorite golf hole on that entire course, number 7 at Pebble Beach, which is the most famous golf hole in all of golf. And now it is hanging up in his office in Draper, Utah. Thank you.
Imagine your baby being disinterested in the world around him. Imagine your child awake most hours of the day where a full night's sleep is rare. Envision your child never smiling or having other warm expressions by 6 months. Imagine your child having absolutely no words by 16 months, not even dada or mama. Envision your baby not even babbling by 1 year old. Not what you expected from your new child. Would you think this is odd? Well, yes, it is. This is reality for parents born with a baby with autism. Autism affects 1 out of every 150 children. Boys are 4 times as likely to get autism than girls. Autism is the fastest growing disability in the U.S. Autism is a complex developmental disorder that affects a child's verbal and nonverbal communication skills and ability to interact with others. Normally, kids with autism have trouble communicating clearly with other people. If you ask a person with autism a question, you will see that it takes them a long time to answer, if they answer at all. They aren't ignoring you, it just takes them longer to process the questions. Typical symptoms include uninterested in the world around him, unable to develop nonverbal communications like facial expressions, failure to establish friendships, delayed response to simple questions or even inability to respond, problems continuing simple conversations, unusual focusing on certain parts of a toy, like focusing on the wheels of a car instead of playing with the car itself. It is shocking news when a child is diagnosed with autism. Some people go through stages of grieving when they first hear the diagnosis, and some people actually refuse to accept that they have autism. They may become angry with the doctor or psychologist who diagnosed their child. Some say that when their child was diagnosed with autism, they felt like they were getting on a plane, they were planning a trip for Paris, France, but instead got on the wrong plane and landed in Iraq instead. In other words, they thought they'd have a typical child, and they had a view of what parenthood would be like, but instead they had a baby with autism and it wasn't the plan. This is a quote by Joshua Muggleton about autism, and it caught my eye. We are not born to suffer, we are born to thrive. If you live in a dry area and your garden receives little water, you choose plants which like dry soil. But when you are given a plant that likes wet soil, you don't kill it, you water it. You spend one of your 1,440 minutes each day watering that plant. Because you know that given the right care, that little bit of effort can produce spectacular blooms, and so it should be like with children like us.